Hello everyone! For all who still have fond memories of Tiberian Sun and who would like to revisit the experience maybe in a different and new way, this video series is for you. What I want to do is to take a little tour and find out what there is now in 2020 in terms of downloadable mods to freshen up the gameplay, sound design and bring more story to the universe. Since the game went freeware in 2010, modded versions of the game often come as the entire ready-to-play directory, no installation required, which makes things so easy. We will go one mod at a time, starting with the smaller overhaul mods, which for the most part are very close to the original and provide a list of quality of life improvements. Further down the road we will look at some literal game changes, which offer new units, a new soundtrack, new gameplay and entirely new campaigns. I want to focus on all of the points above, but also a thing that I always quite liked about the originals. That being the unique atmosphere and world building. There's only so much a mod with a couple of new units can do, surely, but every little aspect of the game may tell a story on its own. Is there a reference to other games in the series? What may have happened before, what after? Is there an unexplored side story? So, before we begin, let us set the stage. When I as a kid first played Command & Conquer, the first one that is, in the mid-90s, I was amazed. I loved the strange but realistic enough take on the term strategy in video game format. I wouldn't have formulated it that way when I was about 12, but besides the fun and addictive gameplay it felt like our world, gone off the rails in some pretty spectacular ways, but linked to our own in a meaningful and serious way. All the more so because the perpetual TV news of the Yugoslav war at the same time. Sure, it's likely the old tin soldier principle, the practice of giving meaning to a form of entertainment, or toys, made from plastic, metal or pixels by mapping harsh reality onto it, instead of deriving from pure fantasy. But honestly I think there's more in the attraction of a game that has been modeled after the real world. I at least always wanted the media to be honest to me, genuine. I wanted to be taken seriously as a consumer and listener to a story, be it a TV show, a film or a game. I played Command & Conquer on a borrowed Sega Saturn of all things back in the day, and later on my old trusty PlayStation multiple times but never actually on the PC. Now, with the recently remastered version of Command & Conquer Tiberian Dawn and Command & Conquer Red Alert, a new generation of players is introduced again to the franchise. If you haven't guessed it already, I really love the game series, especially the earlier entries.
If you are detected, you fail. If you fail, you die.
In the late 90s, fans were very much looking forward to the next big chapter in the story of the Tiberian universe, and so was I. What we got was a more futuristic, gritty and pulpy game set in a cataclysmic and somewhat void and desolate high-tech world, and adolescent me loved every little thing about it. Command & Conquer Tiberian Sun was released in 1999 and its expansion Firestorm half a year later in 2000. The game is set about 35 years after the first Tiberian conflict. The world, now massively contaminated by the alien mineral, ravaged by iron storms and Tiberium life forms, is dying, or at least transforming into something unrecognizable. Enter the two main factions, the Global Defensive Initiative, a multinational task force sanctioned by the United Nations, and the mysterious terrorist organization Brotherhood of Nod, splintered into sub-factions since the past century and full of internal struggle. We begin where the GDI ending of the first game left us. Kane is dead, long live Kane, and, spoiler alert, he does indeed. Hiding in the shadows for decades, as is the Brotherhood's way. What follows is the archetypical conflict, the second Tiberian War. Good versus evil, GDI versus Nod, with a third non-playable faction, the Forgotten, thrown into for good measure. The story, very much like the Cyborg Uprising and the Firestorm expansion, couldn't be any more 90s sci-fi. A comfortable look from your couch down the cliff of what all could go wrong in a high-tech universe in a glass box, at a point in time where everything was just alright. After all, it was the time where at least Western society could relax a bit. The Cold War was over, the economy getting better. It was a time when a number of great sci-fi TV shows and films were made. Star Trek, of course, The X-Files, blockbusters like The Matrix, Men in Black or The Fifth Element. It was a great and fun time for entertainment. At this point, I will not go into full review of the game, as I'm sure there are many excellent ones already here. Tiberian Sun was followed in 2007 by Command & Conquer 3, Tiberian Wars, and the expansion Kane's Wrath in the same year. And then there was the other one, the game we do not speak of. The implementation and new 3D engine of Tiberian Wars was competent, the story alright, but it never actually reached the same gloomy and desolate mood that fascinated me in Tiberian Sun. Be it because of the color palette, young and impressionable me, pure nostalgia or just Westwood Studios at its best. Before we look at the mods on their own, starting in the next video, let's look what we are up against. For those of you who have never played a Command & Conquer game before, make no mistake, this is most definitely not such a tightly knit and stressing game like StarCraft, its sequel or Supreme Commander. But like in every real-time strategy game, you have to know your tech trees, the advantages and disadvantages of your units, cost and timing, and, at least in my opinion, Tiberian Sun hit a nice spot between complexity and relaxing and fun gameplay. The campaign mode in the main game offered 18 missions for GDI and 19 missions for Nord, however, some of which you have to choose above others in certain points. You can also often skip missions if you do not mind a harder task when taking the shortcut, this being because of enemy reinforcements, less credits to spend or other factors. The Firestorm expansion provided 9 missions for each side, this time not against each other but Nord's evil AI Cabal, gone rogue with its cyborg army. Playthroughs of the main campaign are upwards of about 5 hours per side on higher game speed settings. The expansion adds about 3 to 5 more for both sides. Missions are a mixture of standard base building, defense and offense, and solo missions with only a handful of units. Timed missions or the added difficulty of temporary iron storms add more variety. And of course there is multiplayer and the skirmish mode. I myself never really played online or on a local network, just against a couple of AI enemies, preferably on large maps. In any case, with the new and updated game launches, there's still a community of active players online right now. But at this point, playing against someone who did this for 2 decades would be hard as nails. So, what do we need to do in order to get the game running? First, you should download the updated free installer from cnc-com.com, which supports all modern versions of Windows. If you start the game launcher, there's an option to install additional components, such as the in-game movies, which I highly recommend. In the launcher menu you can also choose single player, multiplayer or skirmish. The latter option will start the C&C Net 5 client, but you can also use the old skirmish item in the traditional game menu accessed by single player. There you already have many settings you can play around with. Let's go quickly through some of the options. Obviously you can choose your side, your color scheme if you're so inclined, unit count to begin with, credits of course, the tech level, I'll talk about that later on, the AI level, how difficult your AI opponent is, number of enemies, and the game speed, always leave it on 4 basically. Then you have certain checkboxes like bases, crates I always find interesting because you'll find different power-ups for units and many other surprises. Redeployable MCVs are kind of nice to have. Destroyable bridges are always found very useful because you can cut off the opponent from reaching you or reaching you too soon. With a short game setting you will win the game if all the base of the enemy is destroyed. And then we have a sizable selection of multiplayer and skirmish maps. So when we go here, we see about 40 maps. Some of them are from the Firestorm expansion. I always like larger maps. Many of the maps are symmetric and many are asymmetric, which is always quite interesting. Many of them are in ice sea climate, some of them are more temperate. So, and there's the random map generator, which is always very cool because you can build your own maps to your heart's content, as big or as small as you want, with as much Tiberium as you want, and so on and so forth. And you can also save your maps for later matches. Like its predecessor, the excellent soundtrack of Tiberian Sun was made by legendary composer and musician Frank Klepacki as well as Jared Mandelson. The game offers 23 tracks, all very different in rhythm and mood. I always liked Gloom and Ion Storm, but also the iconic Valves. The soundtrack was also released on a CD, which I actually still have laying around here somewhere. So let's talk about the meat of the game, Tiberian Sun's in-game units. I found the number of different units and their characteristics nicely balanced. No unit is really superfluous and everyone fills a specific role, even in the latter missions, with high-tech weapons like GDI's Disruptor Tank or Nord's Flamethrowers. Both factions are very distinct in terms of their respective theme. GDI has traditional military hardware, missile launchers, heavy tanks, etc. Nord has more high-tech exotic stuff like subterranean vehicles, stealth technology, cyborgs, lasers and so on. To get an overview of Tiberian Sun's units, we can have a look at the fandom.com wiki, where there's pretty much everything you need to know about the game. There are two parameters that determine if a unit is available to be built: the tier and the tech level. There are essentially three tiers of the tech tree. Basic units, like infantry, attack buggies or the basic tank model, that is the Titan on GDI side and the TIC tank for Nord, are all available on tier 1. Once a radar station is built, tier 2 units are available, for example the Hover MLRS or the Mobile Artillery. The tech centers provide tier 3 units, such as the Disruptor Tank or the Cyborg Reaper. A number of units also require GDI's Upgrade Center or the Temple of Nord. The tech level, on the other hand, restricts how far in the tech tree you can build. This restriction only applies in the campaign or when explicitly chosen in the skirmish options. Consequently, more high-tech units or buildings are not available when playing on, for example, tech level 7 instead of the maximum 10. Part of the game is to try out which unit works best against others. In general, there is anti-tank and anti-structure weaponry and anti-infantry weaponry. Essentially everything with a huge cannon or missiles on it does good damage against vehicles and buildings, whereas machine guns are good against infantry. Lasers are somewhere in between. A number of normal ground units with a mix between anti-infantry and anti-tank guns usually is the best option for both offense and defense. The early air units I always found to be a little ineffective and too costly, and only suited to very specific tasks, like the attack on vulnerable power plants, harassing harvesters, or transport. Nord's Banshee was always fun to use, and GDI's Orca Bomber could be quite devastating. Both sides also had two different special weapons available: the Cluster and Tiberium missile for Nord, and the infantry drop pod and of course the iconic orbital ion cannon for GDI. Now we should have a basic overview of how the vanilla game is set up, so that we have a reference point. Mods often try to add units and alter their abilities, which may change the balance of the game significantly. Depending on how many and how strong of an enemy a unit destroys, it gains experience until it reaches elite status. This means that a specific unit gains some sort of bonus, like the ability to self-repair for the Hover MLRS, or in case of the basic infantry, the ability to automatically disperse on ground in case a missile is incoming. One more thing, I will be recording the gameplay footage for all mods in only 720p. This is because the user interface as well as the buildings and units tend to get really tiny on higher resolutions. The modern implementations of Tiberian Sun permit a large number of resolution options, however, so if you want, you probably can play the game natively on a 4K display, where you see the entire map at once. Alright, so we will start with the first mod in the next video. Until then.